In this video I'll show you how to implement a simple rocket launcher using Unreal Engine's projectile movement system. Simple rockets work pretty similar to projectile-based bullets, however, we have to add damage and an impulse in a radius when the rocket hits an object. We will create an explosion component to keep our blueprints clean. You can easily reuse this for grenade launchers and other projectiles that deal AoE damage. I'm starting from the first-person shooter project, which already gives us a character that can move around and shoot. I'm doing this in Unreal Engine 5, but it works just the same in Unreal Engine 4. I also imported the starter content, which comes with some particle effects we're gonna use. The first thing we're gonna do is adjust our first-person projectiles a little bit. We go into the projectile movement component and set the speed to 5000. We also don't want gravity to affect these bullets, so set it to 0, and they should also not bounce. So this is already looking a lot better. We are now going to create an explosion component. We could just put our code into the bullets, however making a component for the explosion makes it a lot more reusable and clean. So click here and make a new blueprint class, which is an actor component. Call this BPC explosion and open it up. The first thing we're gonna do is grab the owner by making a get owner node and save this. In our case this will be the bullet, but it could also be a reference to something else. We then create our explode function. The first thing we're gonna do is play a sound effect and a particle effect. Here we're gonna use the location from our owner. So get the owner and get actor location. As the sound we're gonna use the explosion sound that comes with the starter content. Now we make a node called spawn emitter at location to play a particle effect. Again, here we'll use a particle effect that comes with the starter content. The location we again get from our owner, but in this case we also want the rotation, so we get actor transform. And split this up. We don't want to use the scale here, but just keep it to 1. And we could adjust this here later. We now go back to our first person projectile next to the event hit node. This is triggered whenever we hit a wall or a character. We only want to keep the destroy actor node here. In our case it's a rocket, so we want it to explode no matter what it hits. First we need to add the explosion component here that we created. BPC explosion, and we can pull it out here and trigger the explosion. After the bullet explodes, we want to destroy the actor. Since we get a warning here, we must go back to our explosion and compile it. We can now see that we already have a sound effect. The bullet explodes and it disappears once we hit the wall, which is already almost everything we need for a rocket. On our first person projectile we now create a radial force component. And adjust the values a little bit. In my case I want to set the radius to 500 and the impulse strength to 500,000. You will probably have to play around with these values depending on what kind of game you're making. We need to pass this radial force component through to our explosion component. So we go back into the explosion component and create an init function. Here we make a new variable with the radial force component. When you hold Alt and drag it out, you can set the node here. On our first person projectile on begin play, we pass the reference through. We now go back to our explosion function. After the sound effect and effect is played, we want to create a sequence here. First, we want to check if the radial component is set correctly. Width is valid. In case it is valid, we want to fire the impulse. You can see that our boxes are now being pushed back by the explosion. The next thing we want to do when the explosion happens is to apply radial damage. Here we can pass a base damage value. Let's turn this into a variable. We also want to turn the radius into a variable. We can set the default values here. Let's set base damage to 50 and damage radius to 500 like we did on our radial impulse component. For the damage causer we use the owner. For the origin of the explosion we again use the actual location of our owner. We now need to create an enemy that we can damage. So let's open up here and create a new blueprint class. This will be based on a pawn. I will call this BP enemy. I'll add a static mesh here. And set the static mesh to a statue, which also comes with a starter content. Let's make this a bit bigger. We now go into the event graph and make a new node that is called any damage. When this actor receives any damage, it will trigger this function. Let's give it a health value so we can test the damage. Whenever we are damaged, we want to subtract the damage from our health and set the new health to this value. In the case that our health is below 0, this actor dies. So trigger destroy actor. We also want to log this value. So let's make a print string here and append. Let's place a few of these enemies in the level. They all exploded at once because we forgot to set the health properly. Let's compile and set the health to 100. If we shoot now, we can see that they take multiple hits. You can also see that they don't always take 50 damage. We can change this if we go back to our explosion and check do full damage. In this case, even the targets that are further away will take exactly 50 damage. Again, if you want to turn this on or off depends on what kind of weapon you are making. One more thing that is left is that if we shoot the ground, you can see that we are rocket jumping, which is something we might not want. In order to prevent this, we need to have a different collision preset and object type. So open up the project settings. Here go to collision and create a new object channel. Call this player and have the default response be block. In the presets, create a new preset. This should be collision enabled Current physics and called player. The object type should also be player. Back in our first person character, select this collision preset. You can now see that the impulse from the explosion doesn't affect us. At this point you have a fully working rocket launcher, however it still doesn't look great. You'll have to find some assets on the asset store or get them made. For my indie game I created 3 types of rocket launchers you can see here. I just got a rocket launcher model, rocket model and some particle effects from the asset store and combined them this way. This concludes today's video. I hope you got some good information out of this and see you on the next one.